He gave everything once: his time, his strength, his loyalty. And for a long time, he believed that love meant giving more than you received, meant sacrificing quietly, enduring silently, and showing up no matter the cost. But what do you do when the giving never ends, and the receiving never comes? You stop. Not because you're bitter, not because you hate anyone, but because you finally see what peace feels like. So if you've ever sat quietly and thought, "I'm not angry, I'm just done explaining myself," leave a comment. Peace over pressure. Let's talk about why more older men are walking away from marriage, cohabitation, and even dating not out of fear, but out of clarity. 1. Divorce didn't just hurt, it cost him everything. Divorce isn't just an ending, it's a dismantling. He didn't just lose a partner. He lost stability. He lost his identity. He lost everything he thought he had built. 30 years of effort, raising kids, staying loyal, working overtime, swept away in one courtroom hour. And in that courtroom, he didn't just watch assets divide. He watched his trust fracture. He heard lawyers speak of him like a number, not a man. He saw years of sacrifice reduced to monthly figures, while his character was put on trial without ever raising his voice. Some men walk away with dignity, many walk away with debt, and almost all walk away with a new understanding. Love isn't always protection. Sometimes it becomes litigation. He didn't think it would end that way. He wasn't perfect, no man is, but he showed up, stayed, tried, and yet he still watched everything he built collapse, while being told to move on. So when someone asks him now, "Why don't you try again?" or "You'll find someone new," he smiles. Not bitter, just wiser. Because once you've lost your home, your peace, and sometimes even your place in your children's lives, you stop chasing romantic ideals and start protecting the sanctuary of your sanity. He's not closed off. He's just awake. And that kind of awakening, it doesn't need fixing. It needs respect. 2. Peace isn't a luxury anymore, it's survival. There was a time he believed that love came with noise, that the arguments, the tears, the emotional storms, they were just part of passion. He thought keeping the peace meant staying quiet, swallowing his truth, avoiding conflict to keep the relationship together. But over the years, that peace became a performance. He smiled through tension, laughed through criticism, lived in a house that was never violent, but never calm. It wasn't until she left, or until he walked away, that he realized what had been missing all along: stillness. Now, he wakes up, and there's no shouting, no cold silence stretched across the breakfast table, no walking on eggshells because of a bad mood he didn't cause, but it was expected to be fixed. The absence of tension doesn't feel like boredom anymore. It feels like oxygen. He can leave a glass in the sink without a lecture, speak his mind without fearing withdrawal, sit in a room and not feel judged, just at ease. Peace isn't a luxury now. It's a requirement. And if a woman enters his life with drama, volatility, or emotional chaos, he doesn't try to save her. He doesn't play the therapist, the fixer, or the emotional punching bag. He just quietly steps back, because he knows once you've fought too long for silence, you never let noise in again, no matter how beautiful it looks. 3. He doesn't want to lead another family he didn't build. He's not afraid of love. He's not against families. He respects the journey everyone brings with them, but he's also realistic. At his age, most women don't come alone. They come with children, ex-husbands, ex-in-laws, financial links, emotional ties, and routines he didn't create, but would be expected to support. And often, he wouldn't just be a partner. He'd be a substitute, a surrogate, a symbol of stability, expected to lead a tribe that never chose him. He's lived that before, where he tried his best to be respectful, to step in gently, contribute quietly, care honestly. But still, the children saw him as a stranger. The ex saw him as a threat. And the woman, though grateful, expected him to carry responsibility without authority. He doesn't want to be the man who funds the birthday, shows up at the recital, fixes the sink, only to be told, "You're not their father," when conflict arises. He doesn't want to be asked for leadership, then denied the respect that leadership requires. He understands family is messy. He holds no judgment, but he knows now, He deserves to build something, not just blend into someone else's script. If she wants a partner, they can start something together. But if she wants a savior, he's not auditioning. He's earned the right to say, I don't belong in someone else's history. I belong in something new. And if that new never comes, he's already found peace in his own chapter. 4. He's seen too many masks melt after commitment. She was perfect in the beginning, warm, attentive, curious about his past. She laughed at his jokes, listened with her eyes, told him she appreciated how steady he was, how different from the others. For a moment, he believed it. He let his guard down, started imagining, maybe this one's real. But time, as always, revealed what charm tried to cover. Once the chase ended, the shift began. The playful teasing turned into pointed sarcasm, the admiration into subtle criticism, the intimacy into power, and the woman who once made him feel respected now treated him like a project. Something to manage, to direct, to control. He's not imagining it. He's seen it before, and the older he gets, the faster he spots it. He used to think it was him, that maybe he changed or stopped showing up the right way. But now he knows. Some people wear masks, and some drop them the second they feel safe. He doesn't judge it anymore, but he also doesn't stay. He doesn't chase butterflies or words. He watches patterns, energy, reactions to no, responses to boundaries. Because character doesn't change under pressure. Masks do. So now, when the energy shifts, he doesn't explain it away. He doesn't wait for the real her to come back. He knows the real her just arrived, and he quietly leaves before her control replaces his peace. 5. He's done being a wallet with emotions. He's always believed in showing up, paying for dinner, helping when needed, being a provider in spirit, not out of obligation, but out of pride. But somewhere along the way, that generosity was no longer appreciated, it was expected. He started feeling like a subscription service, émotionnel support on demande, financial stability on schedule. But what came back? Drama instead of gratitude, demands instead of care, guilt instead of love. He dated women with financial chaos they didn't disclose, who expected him to step in like a rescue plan. Women who said they wanted a partner, but only acted like it when they needed help. And worst of all, when he asked for something emotional closeness, softness, simple presence, he got labeled as needy, or worse, ungrateful. He's not against giving. He's against being used. He's not your therapist, not your bank account, not your emotional crutch while you heal from your past. He's a man. He's tired. And he's finally learned the difference between giving from love and being milked for resources by someone who has none of their own to give. So now, he observes early, when the love language is mostly receiving, when generosity is one way, when thank you never shows up, but you should have, does. That's not partnership. That's emotional debt dressed up as connection, and he's no longer paying the bill for someone else's emptiness. 6. Dating feels like a job with no pay. He remembers when dating was simple, a conversation, a connection, a natural pull. Now, it feels like a sales pitch. Polished profiles, filtered photos, pre-written questions, and rehearsed answers. He's tired of being expected to impress, just to get a maybe. Tired of dinners that feel like interviews, where he's being assessed for his income, his stability, his willingness to commit, before she even asks what kind of soul he carries. Modern dating to him feels like a job application, with no promise of feedback and no emotional return. He's not anti-effort, but he's done performing. He's done being told he should try harder, while being met with women who bring very little beyond appearance and expectations. He wants depth, someone who values conversation over caption quotes, someone who asks follow-up questions, not just talks about herself, someone who shows interest after the first date, not just during. But he's realistic. He sees how the game is played now, and he's not willing to keep dancing in circles where the music is always about her rhythm only. So instead, he reinvests that energy in himself. He walks alone but not aimlessly. He eats alone but never feels empty. He travels, creates, learns not because he's hiding from love, but because he's building a life that no longer needs it to feel whole. And ironically, in that peace, he's found something most men never get to feel in relationships anymore. Rest. 7. The legal system feels like a loaded gun aimed at him. He's seen it happen. To friends, to co-workers, to brothers, men who didn't cheat, didn't abandon their families, did everything right. But the moment the marriage ended, they walked into courtrooms that saw them not as fathers, not as men, but as liabilities, assets split, houses lost, visitation restricted, and worse, their reputation dragged through assumptions, all while being told to stay calm for the good of the kids. He knows the numbers, knows the bias. He's seen how protecting her often means punishing him, even if he earns less, even if she initiated the divorce, even if he stayed loyal while she emotionally checked out. So now, the idea of marrying again feels less like love and more like a legal risk. He's not cynical, he's informed. He knows that modern marriage is no longer a sacred agreement. It's a contract with consequences, and he's no longer willing to sign it just for the illusion of companionship. If loving someone means risking your home, your legacy, and your identity, he'll pass. Because love isn't supposed to cost you everything, especially not your freedom. 8. Emotional safety matters more than physical beauty. She may be stunning, well-dressed, the kind of woman who turns heads when she walks into a room, but if being with her means feeling like he's never enough, if beauty comes with manipulation, mood swings, or weaponized silence, he's not interested. In his younger years, he chased attraction. He mistook butterflies for connection, mistook intensity for intimacy. But now, he knows that the prettiest woman in the room can also be the most exhausting. He's been with women who could light up Instagram, but dim his sense of self, who smiled in public, but seethed in private, who touched with warmth only when it served them. He doesn't need a trophy. He needs a teammate, someone whose presence is grounding, not performative, whose beauty shows up in tone, support, understanding, not just filters and outfits, because a peaceful woman is rarer and more valuable than a beautiful one. He no longer feels lucky just because someone looks good. He feels safe only when someone acts good, especially when no one's watching. So now, he trades curves for calm, style for sincerity, and seduction for stillness, because at this point in his life, he doesn't want to feel excited. He wants to feel safe. 9. His standard isn't perfection, it's stability. He used to believe in chemistry. That spark, that energy, that instant connection. But over time, he realized chemistry without character is a trap. He's loved women who made his heart race, but never showed up when life got hard. He's built lives with partners who were amazing in public, but inconsistent, moody, and disengaged in private. He's no longer chasing perfect. He's not asking for a fantasy. He just wants stability. The kind of woman who doesn't flinch when things get hard, who speaks truth even when it's uncomfortable, who doesn't create problems just to feel something. He values the woman who communicates instead of punishes, who listens instead of assumes, who leans in instead of pulling away when vulnerability shows up. Because now, stability is more attractive than spontaneity. Predictability is more comforting than passion, and peace is sexier than drama will ever be. He doesn't care how fun the first date was. He cares how honest the 10th conversation is. He doesn't need a spark. He needs a shelter. So he watches. How does she respond when something doesn't go her way? How does she treat a waiter? How does she talk about her ex? Because in those small windows, he sees everything he needs to know. And if there's inconsistency, if she plays hot and cold, if her presence feels like a performance, he's out, not because she wasn't perfect, but because she wasn't solid. And at this point in life, solid is all he trusts. 10. He's not bitter, he's finally honest. They say he's cold, that he's jaded, that he must have been hurt by the wrong woman. And maybe that used to bother him, because once, he did care how he was seen. He didn't want to look closed off, didn't want to be mistaken for bitter when all he wanted was peace. But now, he no longer explains himself, because the truth is, he didn't give up on love. He just stopped offering it to people who weren't ready for it. He didn't become cold. He became clear. Clear that staying in the wrong relationship isn't loyalty, it's self-abandonment. Clear that love without boundaries is manipulation. Clear that being a good man doesn't mean being someone's emotional mule. He's had enough of chasing connection that costs him clarity, of compromising his values just to be chosen, of carrying people who were never willing to walk beside him. So when someone says, "You're just afraid to love again," he smiles because that couldn't be further from the truth. He's not afraid. He's just not naive anymore. And that difference? That's not bitterness. That's maturity. So no, he's not confused, broken, or cold. He's simply learned to love himself more than the idea of being loved by someone who doesn't know what that even means. He used to think being alone meant something was missing, that a man needed a partner to be whole, to be fulfilled, to be seen as complete. But that's because for most of his life, he was taught to measure his worth by how much he could give to others. Now, he's redefined it. He no longer waits for permission to feel peaceful, no longer needs approval to live in silence, no longer hands over his emotional well-being in exchange for temporary affection. He doesn't resent women. He doesn't resent love. He simply no longer sees either as essential to his identity, because what he's found in solitude isn't loneliness. It's clarity. Clarity that he doesn't need to prove himself. Clarity that he's allowed to choose peace even if no one understands it. Clarity that not everyone who enters your life deserves to stay. And in that clarity, he's built something priceless. A life that is quiet, but full. Simple, but rich. Private, but powerful. So the next time someone asks, why are so many older men choosing to stay single? The answer is simple. They're not choosing against women. They're choosing for themselves. And for the first time in a long time, it's enough. If you've ever thought, I'm not broken, I just stopped bleeding for people who never noticed I was cut, then leave a quiet comment. Clarity over chaos. You're not alone. You're not wrong. You're just finally awake.